People gonna stand soon after they fall. People gonna hear the call. People see the day through the dark of the night. People gonna make it right. People gonna make it right.
Welcome to Election Recon. This is our first ever Reaction Monday on popular demand. Based off your popular demand, we are doing, despite how tired I am, a reaction video. It's my first ever reaction video. This is probably the first informal setting here in the oasis of reality. Welcome. Find a seat. And I'm happy to do this. I'm happy to be here. It's going to be new. It's going to be exciting. So looking forward to all of that. How this is going to go, for those of you who are tuning in and voted for the video, what our team did is we nominated 4 platforms or pundits or shows or whatever, and then you guys spent the weekend voting on what show or platform or voice you wanted me to react to, and overwhelmingly by about 60% of the vote, 63 I think percent of the vote, you guys picked Let's Talk Elections. I don't know a whole lot about Let's Talk Elections. I've heard of the channel. I know it's run by a young guy who is into politics. I know he has a more left-leaning tilt or liberal bias, which is A-okay with me. Of course, you guys know I believe everyone has their biases. Certainly I do. Here at Election Recon, we have 2 Republicans, a Democrat, and 1 apolitical independent. We're very honest with you guys about that on the podcast. I think it's okay to recognize that everyone has biases and to own them and to to be transparent about it. So yeah, that's what we got going on. I'm not at home, or I'm not in the podcast studio. I'm doing this in a guest bedroom, so forgive me on that, the lighting situation and all that. I hope the audio as well. As you guys know, my audio and technical skills are renowned for being horrendous when I don't have Jeff and Lauren here to hold my hand. So, without further ado, we're going to get into this video. You guys again voted for Let's Talk Elections. Jeff picked the video, which is ABC News Washington Post releases shocking new general ballot poll. This video came out yesterday, September 25th, 2022. Before I forget, all of Let's Talk Elections information can be found in the description below his channel, and of course the specific video that I am reacting to today. I've never done one of these before, so I'm just going to try to push through it and see how it goes. I'm looking forward to it, especially because we haven't had a whole lot of left viewpoints on the show this year, and I've been trying to rectify that. So I'm excited to get a left-leaning kind of point of view. At least that's the reputation Let's Talk Elections has, from what I know. Already I can tell you that I'm in an initial disagreement. I probably shouldn't prejudge, even though obviously I am right now. I don't know. I'm interested to know what he thinks is shocking about this ABC Washington Post poll, because I read the poll in detail, and there was really nothing super shocking about the math or the data for me there. My gut tells me he's shocked because ABC Washington Post tends to have a more Democrat-leaning bias in their polls, and it's showing the Republicans up. But I will, I haven't seen this video, and I'm going to go through this journey with you. So without further ado, let's go to Let's Talk Elections and its reaction to ABC News Washington Post poll released this past week.
Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, September 25th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the ABC News Washington Post poll that was just released on the national generic ballot that shows the Republican Party ahead by 5 percentage points amongst likely voters, 1 point amongst registered voters. Now, the reason why this is such a significant poll is because Washington Post is an A+ rated pollster according to 538. While they have had some major inaccuracies in the past, in 2018 they were
true.
only off by the national generic ballot by about 2 percentage points. So to see them pull
It's
this
also true.
race to poll our current state of the nation, honestly speaking, it could be correct. It also is news that it completely defies the expectations and the trend of our generic ballot at this point in time. Right now, the Democrats on average are up about 1.3% nationwide, so this Washington Post poll definitely comes in as quite a surprise. Now, it is a surprise in the sense that this is a year where the Democratic Party has certainly turned around the election. However, looking at those numbers from the
Generic
Washington
ballot
Post,
has tightened.
if this was another type of red wave year, this honestly would be underestimating them. You go back to 2010, you go back to 2014, and you find that the margins of victories were larger than 5 percentage points. And in many cases, the polls actually underestimated the Democratic Party. Now, looking at the Republican Party.
Okay.
Looking at this poll from ABC.
I'm glad he corrected that because he said he underestimated the Democrats in 14 and 10, which is absolutely factually inaccurate, but he caught himself and he just misspoke there. So I'd say so far so good here 90 seconds in, but I don't know if I agree that this ABC Washington Post poll has gone against the grain of the generic ballot. He's using 538, which I know a lot of Republicans or conservatives are going to rip their hair out at. But, it's his video. Let's let him use his tool. I bring 538 on my show as well because I like to show everybody everything and get different point of views. But, the point I'm trying to make here is at 1.3% in the aggregate, in the average, versus for the registered voter data set, a 1-point Republican win and a likely voter data set of 5 points for the Republicans at the moment is just doesn't seem to be too outlandish by any stretch of the imagination. The RV is right within the margins for this aggregate, and the LV is just outside of it. So really nothing mathematically shocking here in my opinion, but let's continue.
News. I don't know exactly to what extent that I would trust it when I throw it into the average. I do think that it is a very accurate pollster, and I do think that the A+ rating cannot go unnoticed. 538 clearly likes this pollster, and for good reason. When you take a look at its electoral history, as I said, in 2018 in specific, they got the House national ballot correct, only off by 3 points and only off by 2 points. They had two different polls that they released when it came down to the generic ballot. On one front, they said that the Democrats were going to win by 7 points. On the other hand, they said the Democrats were going to win by 8 points. The final margin ended up being larger, but at the end of the day, generally got things in the ballpark, but underestimated Democrats by 4 points. In the Senate race, they were off by 1 point. You go to 2020, though, this is where they had some huge inaccuracies, but still some pretty accurate overall gauges on public sentiment. For instance, in the state of Wisconsin, this was the big and most notable failure on behalf of the Washington Post.
Egregious.
Biden was up 17 points in Wisconsin. He ended up winning by 0.6.
Absolute miss. Egregious miss.
It was exceptionally outside the margin of error, but in some other states, they got some things at least correct. They got Michigan correct in terms of its actual winner. It was off by 4 points. Florida was off by 1 point. They said Trump would win Florida. Many other pollsters did not. Pennsylvania, they were off by 6 points, but still accurately predicted that President Biden would win the state. Generally speaking, they've gotten the victors correct, but they were off in North Carolina when it came down to the presidential race and the Senate race. So sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not. Overall, the Washington Post is a generally reliable pollster, but I wouldn't put all of my expectation into it, especially when it defies the average in such a way.
Okay, I mean that's fair. I for those of you that don't know, 538 has a very strong business relationship with ABC and Washington Post, so it's not surprising to me to see them rank kind of their own poll, so to speak, as A+. Certainly, it's not an A+ poll here at Election Recon. Their misses in 2020 were horrific, and where I'm going to part ways with. I'm just going to call them LTE because Let's Talk Elections is a little bit of a tongue tire for my end right now. I mean, listen, it's one thing to call states and races correct. Here at Election Recon, we care a lot more about margins and vote shares than we do about calling the state right or wrong, especially in very close elections where the difference may be tenths of a point or like maybe 1.2 points. That's kind of what we're looking at. So it's one thing to just say, oh, this candidate's going to win this state, but then be off by 13 points is just that's not acceptable practice in the industry, in my opinion. It's pretty egregious, and we'll just leave it at that.
I will also point out that ABC News and the Washington Post haven't been too kind to Democrats when it has come down to the generic ballot in the past. When you take a look at their poll from the month of April, you will find that they had the Democrats ahead by 1. Not exactly an overwhelmingly large margin, but also against the odds at that point. You go back previously. You see that in February, they had the Republicans up by 7. So you can continue through and take a look at some of their numbers. In November, they had the Republicans up by 10. So really, it does fluctuate, and in many cases, goes above and below the national expectations for either political party, and in some cases, completely moves against the average.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with him here either. I'm going to break with him because there's so much time in between those polls that he just pointed out. This entire election cycle has been really a roller coaster ride. There's been, in terms of enthusiasm, there was at one point in this election cycle, the Democrats were super depressed. Then, they came kind of resurging back a little bit with Dobbs. The country is just so tribalistically divided right now. So you have a very small, very thin, true stretch of independent voters, and they're very elastic. They're very elastic right now. In modern times, it's more the exception than the rule to have a stable generic ballot. We've had a couple cycles like that, but more likely than not right now, it's this up and down thing. So I really don't understand what he's driving at here when he's complaining about the swings that has months and months of gap in between them. So I really don't understand what he's driving at here. It all kind of makes sense to me. So the electorate is elastic, and so has the polling been so far. So I'm not, there's been a lot of things that have happened between those polls and now. So I don't understand what he's driving at here.
Just something to think about. I will also say that these numbers are a bit misleading on the front, that Real Clear Politics is averaging in the likely voter sample when it comes down to ABC News. I don't know if this is intentional. I'm not trying to call Real Clear Politics out for any of their maneuvering when it comes down to their way that they weight their models. But
should be putting
I will
in
say
LD.
that it is a bit weird that they use the likely vote sample for the generic congressional vote.
Nothing weird about it.
When in all of the other polls, they did not. In April, they used registered voters. In February, they used registered voters. When you take a look back in November, they used registered voters.
That's
so
fine.
They had the ability, at least so it seems, to do the same thing this time around and utilize the registered voters, which were Republicans +1, but they opted for the likely voters. I think they opted for the likely voters because it gave the Republican Party a more advantageous lead. Real Clear Politics, at least when it comes down to what they publish on their website and the way that they have been skewing, it seems very much that it is geared towards the right wing. But I will say that I do like a lot of their data and the way that...
Okay, that I really strong. This is the first real break I have with this guy. Likely voting screens are needed. And matter of fact, Sean Trend from RCP tweeted about this 2-3 days ago, sharing the same frustration many of us have. Like, we don't understand why all these RVs are still coming out when we're well past the time where normally likely voting screens are coming in. So I don't understand his position here at all. I think it's not, his opinion's not just wrong about likely voting screens. It's just factually inaccurate, his analysis here. At some point, pollsters have got to figure out through modeling and through the questions that they're posing in the polls, they have to try to figure out what the electorate is going to look like. And I will admit that there's a little bit more art there than science. At some point, some subjective data points have to come in. There's going to be misses. That's why, it's partly why we have margins of errors and why there's, to use a military term, signal to noise ratio or noise in the polls and in the numbers. And there always will be some sense of uncertainty. That is true. No, it's very rare that a poll would get the outcome of an election just dead on, like to the 0.1% of a point, right? There's always going to be unknowns that polling is going to miss things, that's just accurate. But you can get pretty close, and that's the point of polling, is to understand what a snapshot of the race in time, and B, what is important to voters, and C, who's going to vote. And we need to put in likely voter screens to get that, figured out, and that's why they do it. So, and then to attack Real Clear Politics here to choosing the likely voter data set instead of the registered voter data set is insane, because Real Clear Politics always goes for the likely voters late in the election, and they should go for the likely voters late in the election. Likely voting polls have been far more accurate, especially in midterms, than registered voting polls in the final outcomes at late. So, I don't want to be too long-winded here, but I really couldn't disagree with this guy more on his attack on likely voting screens. It feels like he just doesn't like it because, right now likely voting screens are skewing more Republican. There's a time for registered voting polls, and then there's a time for likely voting polls. But after Labor Day, everyone should really be going to likely voting screens, and that's if anything, this aggregate from RCP is being artificially held to the left by registered voter polls. So just from any political science point of view, I could not disagree with LTE here more.
They aggregate their data, so I'm not going to go ahead and nitpick too hard into this, but I will say that if they were following their standard from all of the other ABC News polls, this would be Republican +1 and not Republican +5, because quite frankly, in a high turnout,
just a really fallacious argument from him.
Really don't matter, because it doesn't gauge for that. Nobody has a turnout model, and nobody knows what the expected turnout is going to look like, except for few and far between.
Trust me, people have turnout models at this point. This is modeling is being done by both parties, and any good pollster and general political consultant for campaigns they have models. That modeling is being done. That's just a really incredible thing to say. That's just factually not accurate.
Pollsters and pundits, ones that say it's going to match 2018, others that say it's going to go over 2018, some others saying it's going under 2018. So generally speaking, I would say that I would have preferred them opt to use the standard type of metric that they did in the past.
Crazy.
But at the end of the day, the likely voter number is still there, but the top line is Republican +1, not Republican +5.
It's
just
+5.
for additional context. But even when that is thrown into consideration,
Crazy.
You actually find that the Democrats are maintaining a lead of about 1.3% on 538, but it has narrowed down somewhat significantly on the ballot on Real Clear Politics, because the Democrats actually maintained a 2-point lead on Real Clear Politics for a brief period of time. It seems here that It was actually only 1.3%, but I do remember a 2-point lead for the Democrats. I think I have a video of it up
for about half a day.
538.
Yeah, he's right.
But looking at this decrease to go from 1.3 down to 0.3, well, it starts to show how the impact of this poll in particular has had on the overall numbers. Looking at the 538 generic.
Just real quickly, I'm going to try not to keep positive, but a 1-point difference between 538 and RCP it's not that significant of the difference, especially when you account for aggregate margin of error, and the noise in polling and the data. So he is over exaggerating the difference here from an entire percentage point in the polling. It's not that significant. So deal here. Okay, so right here, as you guys can see, it's not just Rasmussen went from R+1 to R+2. Emerson went from D up to tie. So basically, what I'm trying to show you guys here is it's not just the ABC News poll that has pushed the aggregate up. Rasmussen Reports was R+1. It's now R+2. That's another point in its favor. You have Emerson, which was D up. That's now a tie. I can't remember where CBS Battleground Tracker was, but my point is it's not just this ABC poll that's moved the aggregate back down from D 1.5 to D half right now. So again, I think he's over exaggerating the importance from the data set of this poll.
Use the standard type of metric that they did in the past for additional. But looking at this decrease to go from 1.3 down to 0.3, well, it starts to show how the impact of this poll in particular has had on the overall numbers. Looking at the 538 generic ballot, it also seems to have had a negative impact on the Democratic Party, but quite frankly, as it should. But to the extent that it did on Real Clear Politics, again, maybe that's why they opted for the Republican +5 lead, because it would have caused more of a shift
subjective
on the overall generic ballot.
RCP has been doing LVs for a long time.
Another thing that really jumps out from this poll is the overwhelming disapproval of President Biden. When you take a look at their most recent poll, you will find that just 39% of Americans, according to ABC News, approve of the job that Joe Biden is doing. 53% disapprove. When you take a look at the
Right in
overall
line
numbers,
with the
though,
other margins.
the average here is 43 for the approve and 53 for disapprove. Looking at the adjusted model for ABC News, you will find that 40% approve, 53% disapprove.
right within the
but
aggregate.
It's not too much off from what the actual numbers said, but it is off from the average. 53 makes sense. 43 being the average, but only 40 being on the actual. Doesn't really make that much sense.
It makes
I
perfect
think there is
sense.
something exceptionally different about the ABC News poll. I'm interested to see if it's more accurate or more inaccurate when it comes down to the.
He seems like a really smart guy. I could tell by the way he speaks. He's probably college educated. Again, I don't know much about him, but anybody in the business here, anybody in the industry, there's just nothing that extraordinary about this poll except for the fact Republicans are shocked that ABC Washington Post, which is a more of a Democrat-leaning poll, has the Republicans up, and it seems like Democrats like himself are feeling that way too. That it's just kind of a shock to the system that it's ABC Washington Post. But if you take away the partisan stuff about it, the partisan opinion, and you just look at the data, there's really nothing extraordinary here in the data in this poll. It's pretty standard. It's nothing is out of the ordinary. When I look at the crosstabs and I delve deep into the poll. So he's really over exaggerating the statistical, and it feels like he's trying to make it an outlier, and it really isn't.
The overall outcome of the election this time around. I think what we have seen thus far from ABC News is that it does seem to skew away from the average, whether in favor of Democrats or Republicans, and we are finding that to be true this time around as well. So it will be quite an interesting race to watch. I will also say that the impact that this has had on the overall forecast hasn't been too heavy. The Democrats have been reduced from a 31% chance of victory in the House down to 30%. It's nothing super significant, but it is a little bit interesting to point out. The Republicans now have a 70% chance at the House and a 31% chance at the Senate, meaning that now the Republicans have a higher chance in the Senate than Democrats do in the House. It was the opposite just a few days ago. So you can start to see how some of these polls slightly nudge these models in a way that becomes more favorable for the GOP rather than more favorable for the Democratic Party.
I'm not going to get. I mean, I think I've made my point on the partisan skew on either way here that he's trying to make out. But just for again, our viewers know that the election recon model is significantly to the right of 538, but we show 538 just like we show Big Data Poll and other data points, and on our social media, we retweet everybody because we're here in the Oasis of Reality. We believe that it's okay not to shy away, I should say, from other viewpoints and opinions and analysis, and we don't feel like we have a monopoly on who's right or who's wrong, and one poll wouldn't adjust a model this late in the game that significantly, and a model as sophisticated as 538's is, and sophisticated in the sense of how much stuff gets put into it. One poll isn't really going to make a significant impact or difference. So again, I'm not 100% sure where what he's driving at here.
Especially when the numbers are not so much lopsided in the favor of the Democratic Party as many of these other polls would tell you. For instance, the Economist YouGov poll, Democrats +5. Politico Morning Consult, Democrats +5. Emerson College, tie, that was Republican before. NBC News, tie, was Republican before. Fox News, Democrats +3, was Republican before. New York Times Siena College, Democrats +2. Harvard Harris, Democrats +2. Trafalgar showing an improvement for the GOP. But overall, I would say, what I get from this is that there are some outliers here, but it's about four of them. Four of them show the GOP ahead, and Trafalgar is a Republican pollster. It has, very well known as a Republican internal pollster, might I add.
It's
very
not
much different from the rest of the way that they do it.
Oh, geez. Okay, listen. I call partisan zealotry out on both sides. This is a partisan zealot moment. There's no. If you're going to call the four Republican leading polls here an outlier, I mean. Listen, there's 11 polls being shown here in the aggregate. You have 5 in favor of the Democrats, 4 for the Republicans, and 2 ties. So if you're going to turn around and say that the 4 Republican polls are outliers, but not the Dem +5, Dem +5, Dem +3, et cetera, that's just not calling balls and strikes fair. That's just not. if you're going to sit there and say ABC News, Washington Post, and Trafalgar are outliers, then you would have to, in your analysis, if you're being objective, say the potential for the Economist and the Politico polls are also outliers at D+5. But I don't think any of these are super outlier polls. They're all close enough within the margins. The median. The median of the aggregate, they're so close enough that there's really not an outlier. If you account for the margins, those that are outside the margins are only a point or two out of the margin. So even though I would consider them misses, let's say it ends up being a dead even electorate, it's a tied electorate at the end of the night, and you have polls that are +5 in either direction. I would consider those misses, but they're not egregious misses. So, again, a real fallacious argument.
Methodology, the way that they do analysis, whatever it might be. But looking at ABC News, looking at CBS News, and looking at Rasmussen reports, well, these also come together and say the GOP is ahead, and none larger than ABC News, besides Trafalgar. But again, we've already addressed their biases. So,
and listen, Trafalgar is a right-leaning poll. I have no problem with RCP putting R next to Trafalgar Group, just like I have no problem with them putting D next to PPP. But the point I'm trying to make here is they are not an internal Republican poll. They do public and private work like any other pollster out there, or most pollsters, I should say, out there. So again, that's his left-leaning bias kind of coming through and taking a shot at a Republican pollster. Here at Election Recon, we don't give two shits whether they're R or D. The only thing we give a crap about is, are they right? Are they right? And the R or D doesn't matter to us at all. And it really shouldn't to this guy if he's trying to provide objective analysis.
ABC News, I think, really just is this shocking poll because it has come out against the average
Not
in
shocking.
a way that is quite unexpected. There are many Republicans out there that don't trust the polls, though, that are using this as a point to say that Republicans are ahead. You cannot say you don't trust the polls when it shows the Democrats ahead and then completely flaunt this one. I do think that this one should be thrown into the average, and I do think there is validity behind the ABC News poll. I don't think
quit trying to pause it, but I mean, that's fair. And Republicans, the far left and the far right both do this. Zealots on both sides do this, where, poll comes out, they love, they embrace it. Then a poll comes out they don't like and they trash it. He's absolutely right to say that. I'm really glad, despite his concerns about this poll, or apparent concerns, that he doesn't feel like it should be thrown out. It shouldn't. This is why we have aggregates. Pollsters make mistakes. Some pollsters' biases show through, and that's why we have an average and an aggregate and all this. So I'm really, that's a fair point, and I agree with him on that.
We should throw it out. I don't think we should not consider it because it doesn't match the average. At the end of the day, polls are to find what they might find. And honestly, there is a real possibility that ABC News is picking up a trend that hasn't been picked up on before.
That's true.
But I will say that might not always be the case.
It's also true.
There also seems to be a difference here when it comes down to likely voters and registered voters. Every single likely voters poll that we've seen here is either a tie or has the Republicans ahead. Every single registered voters poll has the Democrats ahead, and one of them has a tie. So you start to see where the difference is here. Historically speaking, likely voter polls overestimate the GOP simply because of the fact that they poll a more white audience, which thus means more conservative, and older audience because it's based off of who votes the most. Who votes the most? White Americans. Who votes the most? Older Americans. Who votes the most? Educated Americans. So generally speaking, when I say educated, I mean it in the sense college degree, doctorate degree, even high school diploma. When you look at the amount of people who vote by each education level, race, income, age, you always find that as you get to older, wealthier, more educated, and also just in general white Americans, they are the most likely to vote.
That's true to point. So I mostly agree with him there, but this idea that white college-educated voters tend to vote Republican, that has really been a shift since 2016. So that part of his analysis is not backed up by the data. So I don't know where he's getting that. If anything, in this country, there's a big shift right now between working class voters who are now moving towards the Republican Party and college educated whites who are strongly moving to the Democratic Party more often than not. So that part of his analysis is wrong. But in terms of who is the most reliable voter in the country, it is absolutely the college-educated white, and it's really starting to become a separation between college-educated women from men. So college-educated women are voting at very high propensities right now. So I agree with most of that part of his analysis, but that last part just doesn't add up there, where college-educated whites are breaking harder for Republicans. If anything, it's a swing in the other direction. So he's kind of defeating his own argument if you go and you do the homework and you look at the data and you source it out.
Happens that they are the most conservative group in this entire country. There are pitfalls, though, of using a likely voter metric. Back in 2018, some of these likely voter polls got things correct, and a lot of them transitioned to the time we reached the election. But Rasmussen reports, one of the pollsters that's showing the Republican ahead by 2 right now, is showing Republicans ahead by 1 back in 2018.
Yeah, big miss by Rasmussen.
Off by over 9 points. So there are inaccuracies that certainly can.
I want to go back just for a minute. I'm sorry again to keep pausing. This is my first time on a reaction video, but this data set that he brings up there, he's showing 2018 as this like super hit for the polls. And I would say they were closer to being right on the national ballot. So the national vote share, they were pretty good. It was not a great year, 2018, if you break it down to like congressional district. And there were some real big misses on the state level too, and especially in the Senate in 2018. So that being aside, we're just looking at the national ballot test here, so let's stick with that. He disproves his own argument against likely voting polls. Look at, there's only one registered voting poll. That's the Economist YouGov. The point I'm trying to make here is look at all these likely voter polls, because of course you want a likely voter screen in late in the game, and this is obviously leading right up into the election. If you look here, it was the final result on the national ballot was Democrat 8.4 in 2018, and look how close most of these polls, well within that 1.5 window that we look at here at Election Recon as a hit, right? Like they got it right, 1.5. And so, because that's a 3-point swing in either direction if you're within 1.5. So, Fox News +7, okay, great. USA +8, almost right on. 7, 9, 9, 5, 9, 8, 7, 13, kind of a miss. And obviously Republican +1, a huge miss. But the point I'm trying to make here is he really defeats his argument going to this screen here, likely voting screens versus registered voting screens. So hearing his analysis there, it's kind of proof positive to me that his partisanship is just showing through, and he just prefers RVs right now because it shows his side up. That doesn't make RVs more accurate. He's showing you here that LVs tend to be more accurate.
Had by 1 back in 2018. They ended up being off by over 9 points. So there are inaccuracies that certainly can be seen and can be calculated through the fact that likely voter was prioritized over registered voters, but as we get closer to Election Day, you might start to see that change. However, knowing the 2018 turnout, some of these pollsters are going to go into this apprehensive because they don't know what the composition is going to look like this November. They don't know
starting to get a good idea.
The most inspired to turn out, the least inspired to turn out. They don't know what the racial, socioeconomic, whatever it might be, backgrounds are of the voters this November, and quite frankly, nobody does.
Okay, that's not true. Folks are starting to get a good idea of what this electorate is likely to look like. To his point, I will concede this. It starts to become a little bit more art than science, but you can make good, scientific, educated guess on how the electorate is going to look like, especially when you account for past trends, modeling, and of course, when you're asking people directly in a scientific poll how enthusiastic they are or are not to vote. And there's different ways to screen for that. There's different ways to screen out folks who are just being dishonest. So his insinuation that we just have no idea what the electorate's going to look like is pretty silly.
So it's a very difficult race to poll, and ABC News is telling us different from what the rest of the pollsters have been telling us. Political betting markets are having a reaction to some
not a fan of the
polls
political betting markets, but
I think with the Republican Party,
it's not hard data.
Decreasing in chances of the House, certainly decreasing.
It's
in
fun to
terms
look
of
at, I
chances of
guess.
the Senate. But I will say this is quite interesting. Democrats go from 30 cents all the way up to 60 cents now. I will say though, there seems to be a plateauing or a decrease in some cases for the Democratic Party as more people become hesitant to believe the Democrats might actually take it away with this race. And they honestly can't be blamed. Democrats are in a position about 43 days out till the election where they are in a good one when it comes down to the Senate, but not so much in the House. The House has been treated as this foregone conclusion. And
I would say that Democrats are in a very competitive position. The Senate was always going to be very competitive. This idea that one side or the other is just going to run away with the Senate in this election cycle is just not supported by factual data. The Senate's really, in my opinion, much closer to a toss-up at this point. The Democrats have more incumbency, and the incumbency factor plays. So you could make a real argument that it could be a D+1, D+2, or an R+1, R+2, and of course 50-50 tie goes to the Democrats because they have the White House. To say that they're in a good position is pretty subjective.
And it probably can still be treated as such. The GOP is still more than likely going to win control of the House of Representatives, but it was never in a question that Democrats could even come close previously, and now they might. They may not win it, they may lose it, but they may only lose it by 10 seats. And honestly...
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. There's going to be a lot of Republicans that get upset with me that I said that, but I think that's absolutely fair. That's an absolutely reasonable prognostication right now. I would say it's probably anywhere between that being the floor, which could happen, right? And then the ceiling's probably somewhere 30-35. But yeah, I mean, you definitely want to be in the Republicans' position right now for the battle of the House. And I think his assessment that it could be a 10-seat margin between Democrats and Republicans with the Republicans in control is not unreasonable at all. And I know a lot of conservatives aren't going to like that, but I think that's pretty fair.
That would be a safe bet for the Democratic Party because, quite frankly, the GOP can't agree on as much as the Democratic Party can do because Kevin McCarthy is no Nancy Pelosi when it comes down to whipping votes.
Okay.
I will also say
that's
that
pretty
people
subjective.
are apprehensive largely because these numbers are fluctuating. When you are someone who is spending money on a betting market and you see all of a sudden that an A+ rated pollster is showing the GOP ahead by 5, you start to question yourself. You start to think,
not A+
am I
in my
off?
book.
Am I going to be the one who's inaccurately predicting these midterm elections? And in a sense, you don't want to be wrong because you have your money behind the race. I'm just running this in the background so you can watch something on the screen while I'm talking to you about this.
Okay.
But, generally speaking,
that's fair. I didn't understand.
People don't want to be wrong about these things, especially when they put money behind their statements. I think at this point in time, what we are going to find is that the Democratic Party is in a pretty good position when it comes down to our Senate elections, but the House doesn't seem too good. The generic ballot is a good indicator, but it's a lagging one at that. And even if Republicans are leading by 5 points on the ABC News poll, there's no guarantee that it means they're actually leading by 5 points as of right now. And again, I've already aired out my grievances with changing all of a sudden to likely voters instead of registered voters on the average.
Pretty silly argument, but
I think the GOP still has an inherent lead when it comes down to the House because of redistricting and many other things. I also think this year is going to be closer than 2020 was and 2018 was as well. At best for Democrats, it's going to be a mediocre year for them. But that isn't too difficult to see why that's good news, because the Senate only needs a mediocre year for Democrats to hold on to it, considering their advantages in Pennsylvania, Arizona, etc. But when it comes down to the House, this is where Democrats really want to maintain control, but honestly, things needed to get a lot better a lot quicker. And this ABC News is putting a runt in that. It's stopping the Democrats down the road by saying, hey, you're losing by a pretty significant amount nationwide, and thus the Democrats are not super confident, I don't think, going into these midterms as they were before the ABC News poll was released. It's also a poll of reputation. It's a poll that people trust and people utilize all the time, and I think that also really plays a major role in the understanding of our midterm elections, the confidence that goes into it, and overall the sentiment for either political party. But then again, it could be an outlier. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below.
Again, I'm not going to go through this whole plug. Of course, you can find Let's Talk Elections appears on Instagram, Twitter, and Discord. And of course, we have all those links in our description. Overall, I'll finish with this. I couldn't disagree with him more. I mean, strongly. I think his entire analysis about likely voter and registered voter is just completely fallacious from a pure political science and statistical analysis point of view. He has a massive mountain, an Everest-sized mountain to climb to convince me of his point, and I don't think he can back it up with direct, or I don't think he can back it up with evidence or source it out. So It's really just his opinion. His opinion is his argument there is fallacious. His attack on RCP for not doing the RV over the LV is also really silly. I mean, RCP's been doing this a long time, and they've always gone to likely voters over registered voters late in the game, as they should. So I have no idea why he's making that attack. I thought the rest of his analysis was fairly reasonable. He obviously is an educated guy who's very passionate and interested about politics, and I think that's great that he's having a conversation. Obviously, there's a lot of folks that listen to him and like him. He has 154,000 subscribers on YouTube and a large social media following, so all the more power to him. I'm glad that he's talking about elections and getting people interested. I think that's great. But here in this particular video, I think he's just over-exaggerating the impact. He's overstating the impact of this one singular poll, this one snapshot in time. Polling, you got to take it with the trends. You got to take the polls with with a grain of salt, in the sense that this is why we have aggregates and averages. One singular poll should not be taken ultra seriously all the time in terms of what is going to be the final outcome. So that's just my opinion. I'm not trying to dig at the guy. I wish his channel and everything a complete success. I just fundamentally disagree with him on the fundamentals of polling and what RCP is trying to do here. So other than that, thank you for stopping in. I hope this reaction video is something you like. If you did like it, please like and subscribe down below. Share it, spread it out. We sure would appreciate it. Again, I'm Josh Whitfield. This has been Election Recon's Reaction Monday, episode number 1. We will see you next week.